The restaurant was my mother's idea. She had wanted something classy, dignified, and Instagram-worthy, as she put it, which meant a place where everything on the menu was overpriced, the portions were the size of a spoonful, and someone played piano near the entrance just to make sure you felt underdressed. It was one of those glass-walled rooftop places with gold-plated menus and waiters who judged you based on your shoes. And of course, my brother Jacob made the reservation, because Jacob always made the reservations. Just like he made the speeches, ordered the wine, and took credit for every little thing our family ever did. If you asked Mom, Jacob was the success story, the pride of the family, the golden son who could do no wrong. Me, I was the artistic one. That's how they politely said unemployed in our family. That night, I arrived exactly 3 minutes early, but somehow everyone else was already seated. Jacob had taken the seat next to Mom. His wife Lauren gave me a little wave from across the table, the kind of wave you give your neighbor's dog before it barks. My chair was at the very end, right by the server's station, half blocked by a coat rack. Typical. "Darcy," my mom said as I sat down, not even looking up from her phone. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come." I forced a smile. "I'm here." Jacob gave me a slow once-over. "That your best dress?" I ignored him and reached for the menu, but it had already been taken from my place. "We pre-ordered," Lauren said quickly. "Jacob didn't think you'd be in time to decide." I bit the inside of my cheek. Breathe, just breathe. The night dragged on in polished silver and fake smiles. Jacob ordered a second bottle of wine before the appetizers had even arrived. He was charming the waiter, talking about his latest promotion, his vacation to Milan, the new car. Every other sentence seemed to begin with, "at my firm," or, "when you're a top performer." No one asked me how I was. I didn't volunteer the truth, that I had just signed my first major freelance culinary deal with a Michelin chef, opening a boutique patisserie downtown. That after years of scraping by teaching pastry classes in rented kitchens and selling custom desserts at farmers markets, someone finally believed in my work. It didn't matter to them. In their eyes, I was still the girl who made cookies for church events and called it ambition. Then came the moment. Jacob cleared his throat and stood. "I took the liberty," he said, raising a champagne glass, "of arranging the dessert for tonight. Something special. A custom cake for Mom, flown in from Celine's in Paris." The table gasped. Mom clutched her pearls like he'd just proposed to the Eiffel Tower. "That's Jacob for you," she beamed, always going above and beyond. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Not jealousy, humiliation, because I knew what came next. As the waiter approached to confirm the dessert, Jacob turned to me with a smirk and said, "Just loud enough for everyone to hear? You're okay with that, right, Darcy? I mean, I figured you couldn't really afford to pitch in on something like this." My fork clinked against the plate. The table went silent. I swallowed hard, looked around. No one met my eyes. I could have said nothing. I could have let it go. But instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone and texted someone 3 words. "Bring it out!" Jacob's smirk widened as I lowered my phone, like he thought I was texting a boyfriend who didn't exist. Maybe he thought I was just trying to save face, that I'd pretend I had plans beyond surviving this dinner and escaping without crying in the coat room. "Custom cake from Celine's," he repeated louder for the waiter's benefit. "It cost more than Darcy's rent, I bet." Laughter scattered across the table like broken glass. Even Lauren let out a breathy chuckle, like she didn't want to but couldn't resist aligning herself with the winning team. I didn't laugh. I just folded my napkin slowly, my eyes locked on my brother's. And for the first time that night, I smiled. Not forced, not polite, real. Because I knew what was coming. See, what Jacob didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that I hadn't come to dinner alone. My client, Chef Renard, had asked earlier that week if I wanted him to debut one of our collaborative desserts at his satellite kitchen in the same building. I'd hesitated. It felt too soon, too showy. But when this dinner was announced, I had one request: to reserve a table for a private presentation downstairs, just in case. And now, the timing was perfect. The elevator dinged behind me. No one noticed it. Not until the chef himself emerged, tall, crisp white jacket, signature black gloves, carrying a glass-covered silver tray. Behind him, 2 servers rolled out a covered cart. My mother blinked. Lauren stared. And Jacob paled. Chef Renard walked straight to me. "Ms. Darcy," he said warmly, "your request is ready. Shall we?" The entire table froze. "I thought Jacob arranged dessert?" my mom asked, confused. "Oh, he tried," I said sweetly, rising from my seat. "But I brought something special." Jacob stood. "Wait, you know him?" Chef Renard turned to him with a measured nod. "We've been collaborating for months. Her pastry designs are visionary. I wouldn't launch my new menu without her." I let that sink in. Then I motioned to the servers. "Let's begin." The cart was wheeled beside the table. The tray lifted. And there it was. A hand-sculpted sugar rose cake in shades of crimson and gold, layered with lavender honey mousse and champagne buttercream. Edible gold foil lined each petal. On top, in delicate calligraphy, "For the woman who taught me resilience. Happy birthday, Mom." The table was silent, but Chef Renard wasn't done. "This is Darcy's signature creation. We'll be naming it the Matriarch in our fall showcase." The moment cracked open like thunder. I didn't look at Jacob, because I didn't have to. At first, no one moved. Jacob's fork hovered midair, suspended by shock. My mother's expression flickered between confusion and forced composure, the kind she wore at country club fundraisers when someone mentioned something mildly scandalous in front of reporters. Lauren tried to sip her wine, but the glass trembled in her hand. And I just sat down and placed my napkin gently on my lap again, like nothing had happened. Chef Renard stepped aside so the servers could cut into the dessert. A soft gasp escaped my mother's lips as the layers revealed themselves. Elegant, complex, and strikingly beautiful. The scent of lavender and citrus filled the air like something sacred. "This is," Mom said, her voice hushed. "You made this?" I nodded once. "Designed every element. Tested the formula for months. It debuts in New York next week." "But how?" she stammered. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you never asked. Because Jacob never let me speak. Because every time I brought up my work, someone would glance at the clock or change the subject or smile like I was playing grown-up games." But I didn't say that. Instead, I just looked her in the eye and said, "I've been building something real, quietly, while everyone else was busy talking." Jacob finally snapped back into himself. "Oh, come on," he scoffed, waving a hand. "Anyone can bake a cake. It's not like it's corporate." Chef Renard turned slowly. "This dessert will be featured at our international showcase. Your sister is one of the lead designers on the campaign. We've had offers from 3 hotel chains for exclusive rights. I wouldn't diminish it." Jacob opened his mouth to argue, but for once, words failed him. Mom picked up her fork. She didn't say another word. She just took one bite and closed her eyes. Then, quietly, she whispered, "It tastes like pride and lemon." The table chuckled nervously, but she wasn't joking. She opened her eyes and looked at me in a way she hadn't since I was 15, and brought home a spelling bee trophy she hadn't known I'd won. "I didn't know," she said. "I'm sorry." I nodded. I wasn't sure I forgave her yet, but the apology was more than I'd ever gotten. Jacob stood up abruptly. You know what? I'll be right back. I need to call Celine's, tell them we don't need their cake after all. No need, I said, lifting my glass. They already canceled. He froze. What? I smiled sweetly. I called this morning, told them someone would try to pass off a duplicate order under my name. They were quite amused. Lauren coughed into her wine. My mother blinked. And Jacob? Jacob sat back down, slowly, red-faced, beaten. But the best part? I hadn't even served the second course yet. Jacob's jaw worked silently like he was chewing on the words he couldn't say. The man who never missed a moment to brag now sat cornered, cut down by what he dismissed for years. My passion, my craft, my career. He wasn't used to being second, especially not to me. Mom took another bite. Her fork moved slower now, like she was savoring not just the flavor, but the realization. The one she should have had years ago, that success didn't always wear suits or speak in quarterly reports. Sometimes it came with frosting and fire. You know, she said softly, still not looking at Jacob, this is better than anything I've had from Celine's. I didn't smile this time. I didn't have to. Because for the first time ever, she saw me not as the daughter who fell short, but the woman who rose without applause. Across the table, Lauren finally spoke, her voice unusually small. So, what's it like, working with a real chef? I turned to her calm as water, demanding brutal and worth every scar. She blinked. Do you think they'd ever consider? Jacob shot her a look. I gently placed my fork down. Maybe, but I don't offer shortcuts. The waiter returned to refill our glasses, but before he could reach mine, Chef Renard touched his arm and whispered something. The waiter smiled and nodded, disappearing toward the kitchen. Mom leaned in. What was that about? I took a slow sip from my glass and said just loud enough for Jacob to hear, Oh, that? Just a second surprise. Something sweeter. His hand curled into a fist on the table. And this time, I let myself enjoy it. The tension at the table had shifted, no longer thick with dismissal or mockery. Now it crackled with something new. Uncertainty. They didn't know what I had planned next. And for the first time in my life, I was the one pulling the strings while they sat quietly, waiting. Just like I used to sit in the corner, invisible, as Jacob recited report cards and bonuses and fake business advice over dinner. Not tonight. The elevator dinged again. This time, every head turned. Out stepped a man in a navy linen blazer, no tie, confident steps, and a tablet tucked under one arm. Behind him trailed another server, not from the restaurant, but from the floor below. Jacob straightened. Who the hell is that? The man approached our table with a smile. Ms. Darcy, he said, extending a hand. Apologies for the delay. We had a last-minute booking request. Thought you'd want to approve the final price point yourself. He placed the tablet in front of me. My mother looked lost. Price point for what? Jacob narrowed his eyes. I tapped the screen gently. A live design proposal loaded, complete with renderings, investor names, projected earnings. Across the top in clean lettering, Darcy Lang. The matriarch line, flagship boutique proposal, fall launch. The man leaned in. If you'd like to confirm, we'll begin the build-out downtown next week. Your investor's transfer cleared this morning. I signed the document on screen with a flourish, then turned the tablet so the entire table could see. You're opening your own shop? Mom whispered, stunned. I nodded. Not just a shop, a brand, and the investor is seated downstairs. He's waiting to meet me for coffee and for final tasting approval. Jacob nearly dropped his glass. Who would invest in you? The question wasn't even worth answering. But before I could, the server stepped forward and placed something else on the table. A sleek black envelope sealed with gold wax. I slid it toward Jacob. What's this? He muttered, peeling it open. Inside, printed on thick cardstock, was a reservation confirmation. From Lang Culinary Holdings to Mr. Jacob Lang and guest, table denied, client account reassignment notice. I sip my water slowly. Your firm tried to pitch to my investor last week, I said casually. He passed, said he wanted someone with vision, not vanity. Jacob's face drained of color. Across the table, Mom covered her mouth with her hand. And then, as if on cue, the chef returned with a tiny silver tray holding 2 macarons, 1 lemon, 1 blood orange, our signature trial flavors. For the future, he said softly. But I was already living it. As I stood to excuse myself from the table, I felt every pair of eyes on me. Not with ridicule, not with pity, but with something colder. The kind of stunned silence people wear when they realize the game changed and they were never even players. Jacob sat frozen, still gripping the reservation notice. His jaw clenched so tightly I could hear the echo of his pride cracking. Mom didn't stop me. She just stared at the table like it had started telling her secrets she'd ignored for too long. I followed Chef Renard to the private lounge below the rooftop. The lights were low, music soft, and the air smelled like citrus glaze and warm pastry. A man sat at the corner table reviewing spreadsheets. His salt and pepper beard gave him a fatherly edge, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, told you he was nobody's fool. He stood when I approached. "Darcy Lang," he said warmly. Or should I say, Miss Matriarch? I laughed lightly and shook his hand. Either works. This was Conrad Delacroix, an investor who didn't care about degrees or flashy suits. He cared about resilience, taste, grit. He had discovered top-tier chefs hiding in food trucks and turned them into empires. And 3 months ago, he'd stumbled across a sample box I had delivered to a friend's bridal party. He took 1 bite of my lemon thyme tart and tracked me down that night. We talked business over tea. He asked for my story. I told him the truth, how I once spent my 27th birthday sleeping in my car after Jacob accidentally canceled my apartment's rent payment while I was out of town. How my mom suggested I shouldn't have relied on others when my baking equipment was stolen from the shared kitchen space I rented. How no one visited when I was hospitalized from exhaustion after working 3 jobs and baking through the night just to afford 1 table at a food festival. I know I'm not a traditional investment, I had told him, but I don't give up, and I don't forget who hands me silence. He had smiled and signed the preliminary paperwork on a napkin. And now, here we were. I saw the way your family looked at you up there, he said gently, sipping his espresso. Like you weren't supposed to win. I wasn't, I replied. But you did. A soft chime echoed as a dessert cart was wheeled into the lounge, carrying my final creation, a miniature version of the matriarch, plated with edible flowers, beside a new item we'd brainstormed, a sugar sculpture of a wilted tree turning into blossoms. He picked up a fork, tasted 1 bite, and closed his eyes. "This isn't just delicious," he said. "It's defiance you can taste." I didn't say anything, and I didn't have to. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Lauren. "Jacob's gone, stormed out. Your mom's still staring at your dessert like it bit her. I think she's actually crying?" I stared at the screen, then turned it over. "I've spent my life serving people who thought they were better," I said quietly. "Now, I serve the ones who taste and listen." He raised his cup in a toast. "To new empires, and to the ashes we build them from." After our toast, the lounge fell quiet, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that lives in spaces where something real has just happened, where identity shifts, where ghosts lose their grip. I looked around the room, elegant, warm, humming with calm purpose, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged somewhere that didn't ask me to shrink. Conrad stood and buttoned his blazer. "You don't need to say it," he said gently. I know what this means to you. But I said it anyway. It means I'm no longer the extra chair at the end of the table. It means I get to decide where the table stands. He smiled, then glanced at the plated desserts still untouched. Let them try to keep up, he said. You're already 5 steps ahead. When he left, I stayed behind. I needed a few moments to breathe, to let everything land in my chest before I walked back into the night as someone new. I opened my phone again and scrolled through old photos of my baking disasters, of sleepless nights, of flour-dusted notes taped to my fridge with words like, keep going, you are not invisible, they don't get to define you. And then, without warning, a message lit up from an unknown number. You did good tonight. Mom! I stared at it, stunned. She hadn't said a word when I left the table. And now, here she was, breaking her silence with 5 words that sounded more like a memory than a compliment. I didn't know how to reply. Instead, I walked toward the back of the lounge, where a small bookshelf held old food journals and culinary memoirs. Tucked between 2 dusty hardcovers was a plain black envelope. Curious, I slid it out. My name was written on the front. Not in print, but in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a folded piece of hotel stationery. It was dated 2 years ago. Darcy, I saw your name in that food magazine. I clipped the page. I didn't tell anyone. But I kept it in my wallet. I know we weren't there for you. Maybe we didn't know how to be. Maybe we didn't want to try. But I see it now. You were never the extra. You were the fire we couldn't hold. My breath caught. I pressed the paper to my chest. No tears came. Just a stillness. A release. Even if it was too late to fix what was broken, it wasn't too late to remember who I was never meant to be. I stood up straighter. Tonight, I didn't just win. I buried the old version of myself quietly, elegantly, with no need for spectacle. And in its place, something fiercer stood tall. The night air was cooler than I expected when I stepped outside. The city lights shimmered like gold embroidery on black silk, and the moon hung low, thick and pale, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. My heels echoed against the pavement as I walked to my car. Not rushing, not running, just breathing. For once, I didn't feel like I was escaping anything. But when I turned the corner toward my apartment building, I stopped. There was someone sitting on the front steps. At first, I couldn't believe it. The posture, the coat too familiar, too maternal, too intentional. My mother. She sat there as if the concrete was beneath her dignity. But the moment she saw me, she didn't stand. She just folded her hands tighter in her lap and gave a small, uncertain smile. "Did you get my message?" she asked. "I did," I said carefully. There was a silence between us so thick, I could feel the weight of every unspoken apology hanging between our ribs. "I didn't think you'd respond," she said softly. "But I needed to see you. You saw me tonight." "That wasn't the same, that was you winning." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said quickly. It's not. It's just new." I stepped closer, slowly. "You've never come here before." "I know. You never asked where I lived. Not once." "I know," she whispered again, this time smaller. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded, tattered page, worn around the edges like it had been read over and over. My eyes widened. It was my interview from Culinary Next, the very first time my name was printed in real ink beneath my own recipe. "You kept that?" "I carried it with me," she said. "Even when I told Jacob it didn't mean anything. Even when I told myself you just grow out of it." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to." She looked up at me then, her voice low and trembling. "The truth is, I saw you. I just didn't want to see you win without needing me." That broke something inside me. Not in a way that shattered, but in a way that made space. For years, I said slowly, I thought maybe if I was loud enough, bright enough, sweet enough, you'd turn your head. You'd ask me how I did it. You'd show up. But you only came when you thought it was safe. When I had already done all the bleeding. "I'm sorry, Darcy," she whispered. "I came too late. But I'm here." I sat down beside her. Not to comfort her, but to let her feel the weight of being seen on my terms for once. She reached over, hesitant, brittle, and touched my hand. It didn't feel like closure, but it felt like truth. And in that moment, I realized something even Jacob never understood. I hadn't just earned my place at the table. I had built a new one. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing violently on the nightstand. I blinked at the screen. 6 missed calls, 4 voicemails, 24 texts, all from contacts I barely remembered. I rubbed my eyes, still groggy, and opened the first one. "You're on the homepage of Culinary Chronicle." I bolted upright. My fingers flew across the screen, opening the site. And there it was. From family shadow to culinary icon. How Darcy Lang's matriarch is changing the game. Beneath the headline was a photo from last night. Chef Renard smiling beside me, our plated dessert glowing under perfect lighting. The article praised not only the dish, but my quiet rise from obscurity, my tenacity, my creative vision. There was even a pull quote from Conrad. "Darcy Lang is not the future of fine pastry. She's the standard we didn't know we needed." I stared at it, speechless. But while the world cheered, Jacob clearly couldn't take it. An hour later, my assistant forwarded me a clip. It was from a morning business podcast Jacob occasionally appeared on. Only this time, he had barged into the broadcast without warning, red-faced, holding up a copy of the Chronicle article. "This is all spin," he snapped on air. "I helped her. We all did. She's twisting the truth for press. You think a sugar-sculpting little sister builds an empire overnight? Get real." The host tried to interrupt him. "Mr. Lang, this wasn't scheduled." But Jacob kept going. "She's using this family drama to elevate her brand. It's manipulation, not merit. If anyone deserves credit, it's me. I paid for her first semester of pastry school." The host blinked. "You mean the semester she dropped out of when your mother stopped helping her pay rent?" Jacob paused, caught mid-lie. A different co-host, clearly annoyed, said, "Seems like she succeeded despite you, not because of you." And then, the cherry on top, a call-in from Conrad Delacroix himself. "I wasn't planning to speak publicly yet," his voice boomed. "But I cannot sit by while this man attempts to drag down a partner I personally invested in. Darcy Lang has earned everything without shortcuts. If Mr. Lang had spent more time supporting her instead of insulting her, maybe he'd be the one on the magazine cover." The call was cut. The silence on air was deafening. Jacob stammered, flushed, then stormed off set, a meltdown captured on a dozen phone screens, uploaded, shared, and reshared under the trending tag, "Brother of the Matriarch." I laughed so hard I cried. Lauren even texted me later, "You broke him with buttercream." But that wasn't the best part. The best part came when I checked my email and saw a message from Vera Stiles, the executive editor at Savour, the luxury dining magazine I dreamed of for years. Her subject line was simple, "Let's talk legacy." I opened the email from Vera Stiles with shaking hands. "Darcy, we've been watching you. Your work speaks louder than any campaign. We'd love to feature you in next month's Women Who Redefine the Plate issue. Let's discuss a full cover shoot." A cover? The very same cover Jacob once joked I'd never see unless I worked at the printer. I closed my laptop slowly and stared out the window, the city humming below like a heartbeat I finally understood. But the peace didn't last long. Later that evening, I received another unexpected message from an old college friend of Jacob's, a woman named Elise. "Hi, Darcy. I don't know if you remember me. I went to Stanford with your brother. I saw the podcast clip. I just thought, maybe it's time someone told you the truth about what Jacob did, about your scholarship. Can we talk?" My heart dropped. I hadn't thought about that scholarship in years, the one I mysteriously lost after the first semester. Jacob had told me it was revoked for attendance inconsistency, but I remembered attending every class. I called her. Her voice was hesitant but steady. "I was the admin assistant in the scholarship office. Jacob came in, asked to restructure your account so he could access the tuition refund. He said you were dropping out anyway. I didn't think twice, until I saw your name on that article." I sat in silence. My brother hadn't just mocked me. He'd stolen from me. He hadn't just doubted me. He'd sabotaged me. And now, the world that once listened to him was finally listening to me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, letting Elise's words replay in my mind. Jacob had stolen my scholarship money. That semester I lost. That year I spent working night shifts, baking out of borrowed kitchens, skipping meals to save cash. It hadn't been fate. It had been him. And no one ever told me. I pulled out my old documents from a storage bin beneath my bed. Faded acceptance letters, loan records, and email printouts. I searched for the scholarship details, and sure enough, there it was. A line item marked early withdrawal refund, signed with initials I didn't recognize at first. But when I checked the university contact log from that year, I saw it. Request made by J. Lang, authorized family contact, authorized. I had never listed him. He must have called pretending to be helping me. It hit me like a fist to the ribs. My own brother had pocketed the money that could have changed my life, just so he could buy a new Rolex and still pretend he was the golden child. And when I cried on the dorm hallway floor, thinking I'd failed, he had smiled over champagne. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. It was theft. It was erasure. It was war. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. Not for a lawsuit. Not yet. I didn't want Jacob in prison. That would be too easy. I wanted him exposed. Publicly. Unavoidably. Permanently. So I planned something different. I called Vera Stiles from Savoy. "I'd love to do the feature," I said calmly. "But I have a request. The interview? I'd like to shoot it in my old pastry school kitchen." "Pastry school?" she asked. "That's not very glamorous." "It is," I said. "When you learn your hands are your only inheritance." She didn't ask again. The shoot was scheduled for the following week, and I invited my mother, and, with reluctance, Lauren, to attend. Jacob wasn't invited, but I knew he'd show. He always did when he wasn't the center of the attention. On the day of the shoot, I arrived early and laid out my tools across the workstation. The same one I used to cry over in silence while others went home for holidays. The same one I nearly gave up on. The film crew arrived. So did Vera. And 30 minutes in, as I poured caramel over my signature-plated creation, the betrayer's crown, I heard the studio door creak open. Jacob stood in the back, in a too-expensive coat, trying to look like he belonged. Mom looked over at me, panicked. "You didn't tell me he'd be here?" "I didn't," I said, my voice steady. "But I knew he would come." Vera noticed him too. "Should we ask him to leave?" I placed the gold leaf garnish gently on the dessert. "No," I said. "Let him watch." The cameras rolled as I told my story. Not the cleaned-up, quiet version, but the real one. I talked about the stolen refund, the silent hospital nights, the birthday I spent walking home in the rain after Jacob forgot to pick me up. I didn't name him. I didn't have to. The truth filled the air like sugar smoke. He stood there, face pale, fists clenched, unable to interrupt, because the lens no longer belonged to him. And when I placed the betrayer's crown on the final plate, a dark chocolate dome filled with lemon ash mousse resting on shattered caramel glass, the crew gasped. Vera whispered, "It's haunting." I nodded. "It's history." And Jacob? He left the room without a word. As Jacob turned to leave, the camera kept rolling, catching just enough of his exit to become part of the final cut. He paused at the door, like he might say something, but there were no words left. Nothing that wouldn't sound small. Nothing that could undo what had been plated in front of the world. I didn't watch him walk away. Instead, I leaned toward the camera and added the final touch. A single rose petal, dipped in edible gold, resting in the center of the shattered caramel, like a crown that had survived the fire. "This," I said softly, "is not revenge." The room held its breath. "This is a reminder that you don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to survive long enough to serve the last course." The crew didn't speak for a moment. Then someone whispered, "Damn." Vera touched my shoulder gently. "That line is going on the cover." Mom sat quietly off to the side, her eyes red but wide open, like she was finally seeing the full outline of a daughter she'd always blurred in favor of a son. She reached into her purse, pulled out something folded. I didn't look at it then. Not yet. Let the world turn, because for once I wasn't rushing to prove anything. I was finally letting them catch up. The feature went live 3 days later. Within hours, it spread like wildfire, not just across culinary circles, but mainstream media. TikTokers stitched the now iconic moment where I said, "You don't have to scream to be heard," adding their own stories of being overlooked, cast aside, erased by families who never believed in them. The dessert, the betrayer's crown, became an overnight sensation. Bloggers analyzed every ingredient. Commentators praised its artistry, its emotional weight. The gold-dipped petal was named the most powerful garnish of the year. But the internet doesn't celebrate without consequences. And Jacob, he became the consequence. Clips from his disastrous podcast appearance resurfaced. Former coworkers began sharing stories, tales of him taking credit for others' work, silencing junior staff, backroom deals no one had questioned. Until now. By the end of the week, his firm released a statement. "Jacob Lang is no longer affiliated with our company. We do not condone personal or professional misconduct." He didn't call me, but Lauren did. Her voice shook. He's not okay. He hasn't left his apartment. He says it was all a mistake, that he didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't respond, because I didn't care how he felt. I cared about what he did. And then, that same night, I remembered the folded paper my mother had tried to hand me at the shoot. It had sat untouched on my counter for days, because part of me didn't want to read it. I wasn't sure I needed anything else from her. But curiosity can be cruel, so I opened it. And read, "Darcy, there's something I never told you. When you were born, I was very sick. For months. Your father, before he left, wanted to put you up for adoption. Said we couldn't handle 2 children. Jacob overheard us one night. He was 8, and he begged me to keep you. He swore he'd take care of you. I think when you started to outgrow him, when you found your own light, he didn't know how to love you without controlling you. I never defended you. I regret that every day." I sat at the table staring at her words. Jacob had once saved me, only to spend a lifetime resenting what he'd fought for. I read the letter again, slower this time. He begged them to keep me. That sentence looped in my mind, fighting with every memory of him belittling me, mocking me, stealing from me. Could both things be true? Could a person love you in one breath and destroy you in the next? I didn't know, but I knew this. I wasn't going to carry his guilt for him anymore. I folded the letter gently and slipped it into my cookbook binder, between the recipe for my first failed tart and the notes for the betrayer's crown. Let it live among the layers that built me, Mine. Then I opened my email and drafted a press release for Matriarch's official launch gala. And at the top of the guest list, a single blank line, not for Jacob, but for the woman I was becoming. One who no longer needed permission to exist, shine, or serve the final word. The night of the Matriarch Gala arrived with a strange hush in the air. The kind of stillness you feel just before a storm, or just before something is finally laid to rest. The venue was an old renovated glass house in the city's arts district, once forgotten, now blooming again. A metaphor I didn't miss. It was strung with soft amber lights, filled with seasonal florals and candlelit pastry installations. Each table centerpiece featured one of my signature desserts, but with new names this time: resilience, inheritance, silence served warm. The guest list included editors, chefs, critics, and even a few faces from the early days. A retired pastry teacher who once told me I lacked structure, now sitting proudly at the front row like she always believed. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about him. Because 2 hours before the event, I received a text from an unknown number. I won't come, but I'm sorry for all of it. I still remember when you burned your first tart. You didn't cry. You just tried again. You always did. Jay. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked slowly through the kitchen, running my fingers across the marble counters. My name was etched in gold on the menus, engraved on the pastry forks, even whispered behind wine glasses. But none of it felt loud. It felt earned. I stood behind the curtain as the music dipped. Conrad walked out first, offering a short speech about vision, voice, and the reason he chose to back Matriarch. Then he introduced me. The room rose in applause. I stepped into the light, and for the first time, I wasn't trembling. "Good evening," I said. "I know most of you here because you believed in the desserts. Some of you knew the woman behind them, and, didn't want to." A few chuckles. A few still watchful eyes. I built Matriarch for every girl who was told she was too much in the kitchen and not enough at the table. I built it for every woman whose success wasn't celebrated because it didn't look like someone else's dream. I glanced toward the press row, where camera flashes had softened, attention focused. I was told I didn't belong, that I didn't deserve to stand here, but I've learned that belonging isn't something given. It's something claimed. And tonight I claim every part of my story. The audience rose again, this time not with polite applause, but with something heavier: respect, recognition, maybe even reverence. Later that evening, as the guests mingled around the dessert stations, I stood by a towering sugar sculpture titled "The Table I Built." It featured a broken chair mended with gold leaf, surrounded by a ring of mirror shards reflecting the phrase, "Not the leftovers, the legacy." Mom approached slowly. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at the sculpture, then at me. Then whispered, "He watched the stream." He cried. I looked away, not cruelly, but clearly. "I didn't make this for him." "I know," she said, "but maybe you needed to hear it." I nodded once, because maybe I did. But forgiveness doesn't always wear white gloves. Sometimes it arrives as absence, as the space someone no longer gets to fill. I walked away from my mother without anger. Not because it didn't still live in me, but because it had stopped feeding me. I found myself standing near the back doors of the glass house, where a few early spring blossoms bloomed stubbornly along the stone path. There, alone under a lantern's glow, was Lauren, Jacob's wife. She looked uncertain, but she didn't turn away when she saw me. "I told him not to come," she said softly. "He wanted to. He even put on a tie." "I know," I said, "but it would have been the wrong kind of ending." She looked down. You should know. He's not the same? I hope he isn't, I replied. But it's not my job to rebuild him. Lauren nodded, tears brimming. He read your speech 3 times, said it was the most painful thing he's ever been proud of. That sat heavy in the air. And then she handed me something, a small square box. I wasn't going to give this to you, she said, but he left it on his desk with a note, said if he didn't have the courage to give it himself, someone should. Inside was my old scholarship letter, the original, the one I thought was lost, but someone had scribbled across the top in Jacob's handwriting. I stole this from you, but it never made me feel bigger. I'm sorry. D. I closed the box gently. Not with forgiveness, but with finality. Because closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from no longer needing them. Weeks passed. The noise around the article faded, the gala headlines dimmed, and the internet moved on, as it always does. But Matriarch didn't. It bloomed. Reservations poured in. Culinary schools requested to study my recipes. Women wrote from across the world, not to ask for secrets, but to share their own. Stories of being left out, talked over, underestimated. I read every single one. I responded to as many as I could. One girl wrote, "My mom called me selfish for pursuing pastry. I showed her your story. She cried. Then she asked to taste what I made." I cried too. Because sometimes the biggest revenge isn't destruction. It's inspiration. I used the momentum to open a mentorship fund, not a scholarship. I never wanted to recreate the system that failed me. I called it the Second Whisk Grant, designed for women who'd been cut down, kicked out, or started late. No essays, no interviews, just proof of passion and proof of pain. The first grant recipient was a woman in her 40s who used to bake at gas stations. Her first menu sold out in 3 nights. Meanwhile, Jacob disappeared from the public eye. I heard whispers that he was consulting privately, trying to rebuild a reputation in silence. He never reached out again, and I never reached back. But one day, while organizing old recipe cards, I found something I hadn't seen in years. A photo. Faded. Worn. Me, age 6, holding a lopsided birthday tart with Jacob crouched beside me. Flour on his shirt. A genuine grin. Back before ego made him cruel. I didn't frame it, I didn't burn it either, and I just slipped it into a drawer where old things belong. Remembered, but no longer ruling the present. The final chapter of Matriarch came not with a cake, but with a book. I published my first memoir, Salt in the Sugar, chronicling everything. The kitchen nights, the betrayals, the dessert that turned into a reckoning. On launch night, the crowd was small, only 30 people in a cozy bookstore. But I looked at them and said, I'm not here because I was the best. I'm here because I kept baking through the worst. They stood for that. Not for the fame, not for the flair, for the fact that I stayed. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something I never had before. They never gave me a seat at the table. So I built my own. And now, there's always one extra chair, just in case a girl like me needs a place to rise.